Have you ever just stood there, staring at yourself in the mirror, trying on different combinations of posture and facial expression, when it occurred to you that you see nothing but sadness, invisible to the rest of the world? The world inside your head is a comfortable place. It's where you were born. It's the place you're most familiar with. It's where you can discuss your darkest secrets. It's the only place where the complicated web of thoughts and memories that is yourself makes any sense. It's got all your favorite posters and mementos. It's a place that, even if you realized you were trapped in, you wouldn't want to escape. Disco Elysium is a grand tour of that place, and it's a list of reasons why you need to get out of there. That place is nothing but an infinitesimally small ball, carelessly floating around an incredibly massive void. That place is endangered, soon to be nothing but a decomposing heap of matter, dead and forgotten. The end of the world. When you first start Disco Elysium, this is where you are. You're on that small ball, watching it rot away beneath your feet, trying to decide whether or not nihilism for the situation would be more poetic than a struggle. The end of the world might have been minutes away if it weren't for the sound of a motor carriage coming from somewhere in the void, suddenly asking you to explore that void which surrounds your tiny, meaningless ball. You wake up to find that it's been another one of those nights, drinking heavily. The pressures of this real world have been mounting on your doorstep, so once again you turn to booze in order to return that world which surrounds your little ball back into an empty, meaningless void. A perception of reality in which only your own thoughts matter. Some people get there chemically, like Mr. Dubois here. Others get there by simply shutting up and retreating. It's a perception of the world that we're all familiar with. One in which, again, nothing matters outside of what's going on in your own head. To others, you might just be a corpse hanging from the rafters, or barely sane husk of a man rambling to themselves, or one of the quiet kids writhing in misery and loneliness. That's what they see you as, but in your own head, the only place that's truly comfortable, this is all some deep, poetic analogy for something or another. It's meaningful, it's tragic, it's powerful. It's important, if only to yourself. This place is just right. It's where you can do what I'm doing here, sorting out what makes you, you, how you became that person, what the meaning of life is, why you feel the way you feel. Surely these are the most important questions a person can answer. It absolutely seems that way, but you're being hunted. This world you've built for yourself won't last forever. Pretty soon it'll all fall apart, and all of those answers to those deeply important questions of yours will be lost. Archaeologists won't discover your conclusions. Scientists and mathematicians won't reverse engineer the last thoughts that buzz through this world. Your friends and family will invent their own answers to your life's questions, totally different from the real answers, and everyone else will just forget. All of that time spent in this perfect world where everything is justified will be for naught. Your answers will be completely lost, even to yourself. You'll be forced out of this world you've built for yourself, and into that void that surrounds it. And in that void you aren't special, you're just another statistic. To think of this place we all live in as a void is the ultimate tragedy. To be stuck inside of your own head, on your little ball, is to make the entire universe finite. And sooner or later, that world returns to the void, vanishing into the nothingness that you spent your life perceiving the world as. What does any of this mean practically? Well, Disco Elysium takes these dark thoughts we all have about ourselves and lays them out in practical, realistic terms. It shows us the real-world effects of this way of thinking. Sure, death is the ultimate cleanser. If you think and live this way, then it may as well be the end of your small little world when you die. But that's a long way away. What does it mean for your life? How does this way of thinking mess you up big time on the shorter term? It's that sadness, only visible to you, that lays in the mirror. The Furies are at home in the mirror. It's their address. Even the clearest water, if deep enough, can drown. This is the epigraph that opens up the game. No matter how well you know yourself, you run the risk of drowning in that self if you stare in the mirror long enough. You begin to overthink yourself as you seek the answers to the questions of your life. You start to see trouble where it isn't. You suddenly start wondering if what seemed like a perfectly average life was actually that of a horrible, depressed psychopath. It seems like the only reasonable response to this shocking, false revelation is to stare deeper in those eyes and try to find where your happiness is. Try out some different poses, crack a smile or two, tilt your head to different angles. But once you see that sadness in your eyes, everything else just feels like a mask. Sure, you might wear a smile constantly, but staring in the mirror like that, living exclusively on your little ball, you start to wonder if that smile is just a self-defense mechanism designed to get people off your back with stupid questions about your day and your week and your month and your year. Obviously, or should I say hopefully, that isn't the case, but you'll never realize that until you step away from the mirror and start living in the world. Don't just observe yourself in this dirty basement of a mind you live in, your view fogged up by irrelevant thoughts about your childhood and your first love. Go outside, talk to people, see how you are in action. Then you can start drawing up a psych report for yourself. However, it's never that simple, is it? You go outside and talk to somebody, and before too long you're lost in silent contemplation, until you finally get a "what's on your mind?" that awful question. There's so much more on your mind than you could possibly describe. You're trying to figure out just who and what you are, as this person must be, but your answers are written up in totally different languages. Trying to communicate any of these thoughts you're having will just make you sound insane. All you can do is make up some stress that's got you distracted from the conversation. Oh, sorry, I was just trying to remember the name of that one song that was on last night. Something like that will get them off your case. Having to tell stupid lies like that, surely it's better to seek your answers internally. Back to the mirror, or the bottle, or the headphones, or the drawing pad, or whatever it is you use to retreat to your little ball, and make this unhelpful world vanish again. If I can't describe what I'm thinking in terms they'll understand, then what does it matter what they think of me? No matter what I do, their interpretations will be inaccurate. While these all seem like crazy, irrelevant abstractations, I have, of course, been talking about the game this whole time. This inability to share what's really on your mind manifests itself constantly throughout the game. It's the weird dialogue options. The game is absolutely loaded with strange things to say that just completely throw people for a loop. From telling Lieutenant Kitsuragi that you think you have the ability to teleport, to explaining to an old woman that you have to take off all your clothes so that you can feel the wind and gain metaphysical information about the city streets below, to explaining to every single person you meet that you're a hopelessly incompetent disgrace to the uniform, to asking your partner for his weapon so that you can threaten to blow your brains out if the Hardy Boys don't just tell you what's going on. These all, of course, represent that same friction of wanting to explain your complicated inner thoughts to people who've never been inside your mind. However, there's also a wide cast of parabolic characters who are in a similar situation to Harry, even if they haven't yet been to the end of that road. One of the first examples you'll come across is the notorious Simonese supremacist and avid phrenologist, Measurehead.
Your body betrays your degeneracy.
Measurehead keeps the scabs from interfering with the Union's strike against the Wild Pines Company. While you can, thankfully, get around him, the only ways to get through him are to knock him out cold in an incredibly challenging physical instrument skill check, or to subscribe to his quote-unquote advanced race theory. I need to specify now that while I think Measurehead is a fantastic character, I don't agree with a single word of the man's philosophy. However, I'll be digging deep into that philosophy and looking at Measurehead more sympathetically than is comfortable, so forgive me if I say something that sounds horribly racist out of context. Anyways, subscribing to this so-called advanced race theory involves listening adamantly as Measurehead prattles on about the inferiorities of the Ornyes, the frivolous art of the citizens of Revachol, an ode to their homosexuality as he calls it, how pink skin is a trait to be earned through centuries upon centuries of racial domination, how interracial procreation is a morbid, disgusting act that only adds more genetic threats to the gene pool, and all sorts of other stuff, then spending the next few hours of the game internalizing these concepts and making them a part of your character's personality. While Measurehead's ideas are obviously an archaic, counterintuitive, and actively harmful way of looking at the world, it's plain to see that Measurehead isn't just some idiotic racist. He's put a whole lot of thought into this stuff. Sure, the conclusions he came to seem absolutely insane to most people in the modern age, but it's plain to see that he isn't the type to make a racist joke or hate somebody because of their race. He sees all of this as the cold, hard facts of the world. To Measurehead, race is nothing to be joked about, nothing to be happy or sad about. It's just the way the world is. How did Measurehead get to be like this? Did Asimony's parents tell him all of this stuff to promote some twisted version of national pride? Did he pick it up from some philosopher he met in his travels? Sure, why not? It had to come from somewhere. But for it to be such a prominent part of his personality, he had to sit alone in his own head for a long time, looking at himself in the mirror, as it were. Somebody told him the basics of this so-called race theory, and he dwelled on those thoughts for so long that he ended up tattooing his phrenological measurements to his head, and changed his name to match the display. Measurehead's little ball became the only place he could inhabit, and rather than try to live in the world that surrounded that ball, he stuck to it. And as a result, it became so deeply ingrained in his ways that it became his entire personality. The rest of this world sees him as some racist, no more thoughtful than the childishly racist lorry driver we find just a ways down the block, but in his head, he's the only one that truly understands race. I'm sure that as he's describing his advanced race theory to Harry, all he's thinking about is how he wishes he had better words to explain what's going on in his head in more understandable terms. Not at all unlike how Harry wants to explain his apocalypse theory, or how you want to explain the conclusions you've come to about yourself. The words are somewhere, but those words might as well be written in a different language to whoever you're trying to say them to. A perfect example of Harry being unable to explain what's going on in his head is the situation with his ex-something. By looking at her, we can look at more ways in which being trapped on your little ball can affect your life, not just your death. When we quote-unquote meet Harry's ex-something in a dream, there are two major points of emphasis in this scene. The game really wants to drive home the fact that it took the ex-something only a short amount of time, no more than a year, to move on past Harry after aborting his child and finding the emotional support she needed from another man. And she says that it'll take Harry 20 more years to move on past her. Of course, this is all a dream that Harry has at least twice a week, so we're only seeing the ex-something as Harry sees her. Dolores Day. Dolores Day was a politician from 300 years ago, labeled by history as the greatest innocence. She discovered the land that the game takes place in, the Insulindian Isla. She's now considered a mass murderer when discussed in private amongst modern philosophers. Her re-education and settlement programs utterly failed. She's essentially this unsettlingly perfect woman with a dark surrealism to her as an icon. She is, in some small, disconnected and inadvertent way, the reason Revachol is the way it is. Poverty, drugs, strikers responding to corporate greed, all of it can be tracked back to her to some degree. She's a perfect parallel to Harry's ex-something. As someone who's living so far in his own head that he forgets what things like communism and motor carriages are, it's no wonder that Harry confuses his ex-something with Dolores Day. They're both perfect, they're both deeply disturbing, and they're both completely unreachable by any means. Not to mention the simple fact that Dolores Day put the Insulindian Isla on much the same path that the ex-something put Harry on. They set us up to destroy ourselves. To Harry, a simple human interaction with somebody who he feels gets him is as illustrious and unattainable as a meeting with the 300-year deceased Dolores Day. Harry spends so much time in his own head that he can only speak in his own terms, in the language they speak on his own little ball. Nobody understands what Harry is on about anymore. If he wasn't higher ranked than Kim Kitsuragi, the man would have never followed Harry and learned how good of a cop he can be. Harry spends so long on his little ball that he's going to have a hell of a time building a bridge into the void that surrounds it, turning it back into the world, saving his little ball from being his whole universe, from going extinct. This painful inability to communicate one's deepest thoughts and being unable to truly escape from the little ball doesn't only apply to Measurehead and Harry, it applies to everyone. It applies to Klaasja, who's so caught up in her world of drugs, partying, and corporate espionage that she hardly even cares that Ellis Courtenier was fatally shot while inside of her, and this old lady who's daydreamed herself into another person's memories, as she puts it, or the cryptozoologist who can't accept that he needs to give up on his hunt for the Insulindian phasmid. It applies to the Wild Pines Death Squad and their drunken, grief-fueled tribunal of the Hardy Boys for the death of Ellis. It applies to Lieutenant Kitsuragi, who clearly has trouble existing outside of his notebook, unless the stakes are absolutely dire. And it applies to me, looking over the first draft of this essay, wondering if I was able to put these beautiful inner thoughts I've had about this game to understandable words. No matter how much thought and time I pour into this essay, like Measurehead, I'm just going to be stuck wondering if I've done even a passable job of explaining what it's like on my little ball to you all. Above all other secondary characters though, this inability to bring visitors to your little ball applies to Josef Lilianovich Dros, the communard deserter who shot Ellis in the first place, prompting this whole investigation. Dros abandoned his post during a particularly hopeless battle towards the end of the Anticilian Revolution, and since he was an ideological officer subordinated to the Communist Party rather than the Communist Army, the ICM, he was not relieved of his duties with the ICM's eventual surrender. After years of hiding out, drifting from bunker to bunker, all of his fellow survivors of the failed revolution had been slowly forced to retire their political beliefs and accept their place in a capitalist land. The RCM's hunt for the remaining ICM soldiers and Communist Party officers had ceased, and Dros was now just one vagrant amongst thousands. He was the last of his party, or at least the only revolutionary who held firmly to his beliefs in the 40 years since the revolution. Unlike his peers, he was never converted. So, for a little over 40 years, this young, idealistic boy was essentially completely alone on this island, this constant reminder of his past and the ideology of his adolescence. Like Harry, Dros was stuck in his own world, where the opinions of the rest of the world didn't matter to him. To everyone else, he was a homeless, half-sane relic of the past, a shut-in, a suicide waiting to happen. To himself, however, he was one of the most faithful people in the world, standing up against the world and sticking to his beliefs while everyone around him surrendered. You could say that the world has a warped perception of him, but I'd say the more relevant truth is that he has a warped perception of himself. After all, he spent the vast majority of his life with nobody for company, save for a single Insulindian phasmid. This phasmid was perhaps the last one in existence, not at all unlike Dros, who may very well be the last card-carrying communist in all of Elysium. This encounter with the Insulindian phasmid is all a big metaphor for what's going on with Dros and Harry, so let's quickly recap the literal. Then we can start digging deeper. Once we've confirmed Dros' guilt and are making our arrest, we're distracted by the same cryptid we've heard whispers about for the latter half of the game, a phasmid who disguises itself amongst the reeds. However, what wasn't specified is that the Insulindian phasmid is gigantic, by far the biggest bug ever discovered, towering way over Harry and Kim. So why are the few reports about this creature so conflicting? It's because, as well as hiding amongst the reeds, this phasmid has the unique ability to become truly invisible to anyone who's around it for more than a few minutes. When the phasmid first appears to us, hiding out on this island, having so much in common with Dros, the final communard doesn't even realize that it's there, even though the two essentially live together. The phasmid and Dros have so much in common, but Dros has spent so much time in his own head that he can't even see the creature, much less communicate with it or relate to it. Like you and all those people who you can't explain your inner thoughts to, or Harry and all those people he struggles to explain his inner thoughts to, Dros and the phasmid have a whole lot in common, but they're speaking two entirely different languages. Like Dros, Harry is on an island when we first meet him. The island Dros was on was composed of water and political differences, and Harry's island was surrounded by an ocean of booze. However, there's still hope for Harry. Harry can escape from his island, his little ball, his inland empire. Dros has been on this island for over 40 years, but Harry's only been on his island since the X-something left him 6 years ago. When Dros is forced to face reality, forced to answer for his crimes, he's too far gone. He can't see the Insulindian phasmid, and he utterly shuts down, gone into complete trance-like shock when he's told he's under arrest. He's been on this island for too long. He can't handle going back to the real world. In other words, he's doomed to extinction. Through his isolation, he's brought about his own personal apocalypse. When he dies, his entire world will end with him. Harry and us players, however, can still see the phasmid. So what does Harry learn from this phasmid during his metaphysical and perhaps entirely imagined conversation with it? The first thing to note is that to approach it, you have to pass a skill check. Not savoir-faire, the stealth skill, electrochemistry, the drug skill, because, as you'll soon see, the phasmid is the embodiment of Harry's old, drug-fueled life. And then, once you've got its attention, you have to pass an Inland Empire skill check to start your quote-unquote conversation. The first thing it says to you upon passing this skill check is simply, I exist. Upon replying to it that you exist too, it asks you to describe what existence is like for you. I told it that it was like a fire burning inside of me. Something on the inside trying to escape as quickly as it could, no matter how violently, and it replied that inside of it, there's simply lymph, the creature's equivalent to blood. It describes its existence as being like a series of half-lit images, a darkness being intruded upon by both stimuli from the outside world and small voices coming from inside of it, speaking of things it can't comprehend. Not unlike Harry in the beginning, having a cryptic conversation with his ancient reptilian brain, and that darkness being intruded upon by the sound of Lieutenant Kitsuragi's motor carriage. In response to this, you can either reject your exposure to the world outside of your little ball by saying that you envy this creature's solitary existence, or you can say that you're glad to be the sensitive creature you are, glad to comprehend the world outside of yourself. If we choose the latter, the creature says that it doesn't envy us at all, saying that it must be like a living hell to be forced to live outside of our own head. This must be the source of the fire that Harry feels inside of him. His little ball, his ideas about the world, has caught fire, and it's currently burning through his skull, desperate to share itself with the outside world. Harry wants to share his conclusions about himself, but he'll never truly be able to. The fire inside of him is just going to keep on burning until it's finally extinguished, until he's finally extinguished. We can tell the creature that we're handling it, as difficult as it is to carry such a burden, and it simply tells us that the world of insects is rooting for us, and that they'll be thankful for us when we die, and new life can spring forth through the bug's consumption of our corpse. New life will form in honor of our volition throughout all these tribulations. For the first time in this story, Harry is finally proud of himself, for growing beyond an existence as simple as that of the Insulindian phasmid. However, we've misunderstood the phasmid at this point. There's more to it than meets the eye. Like a wandering vagrant, like a corpse hanging from the rafters, or like you, there's a world inside of that simple shell of labels. When we ask the phasmid what exactly it is, it replies factually that it's an undiscovered species and that for the past 350 years, it's been hiding in plain sight over the day, and spreading out of its disguised form to play with trash bins and buoys by night. Just as Harry hopefully has by the end of the game, the phasmid has learned when to just be another reed, and when to be itself. Harry isn't just another reed, and neither is this phasmid, but they've both learned the importance of playing that role. If we reply to it saying that it's insane that it was able to keep up this charade for so long, it simply replies that we're the insane one, because we still have the power to bring about the apocalypse. Even though we've tried so hard to leave our little ball, our inland empire, we still have the ability to die, or to forget everything as we did 2 weeks prior, and with that, the world may as well be destroyed again, at least from our perspective. No matter what we do, we always will run the risk of destroying our universe. As long as a creature is mortal, it has the power to forget everything, or in a manner of speaking, destroy everything. This world that Harry found himself in when the motor carriage woke him up, it's entirely new to him. It's an entirely new universe, because Harry managed to destroy his previous universe. If, as this phasmid teaches us, our universe is still going to be forgotten, destroyed with our death, then what was the point of leaving our little ball? From what we've learned here, our entire life must be centered around that little ball, and the vast world that surrounds it may as well stay an empty void from our perspective. Well, that's still not true. By stopping his alcoholism, by giving up on trying to explain the wild and crazy thoughts that went through his isolated head, Harry gains something that he can take back to his little ball when it is time to retreat there, when the humans are away and it's time to stop pretending to be another reed. He gained pride and hope. He gained a purpose. If you spent your entire life just thinking to yourself, trying to uncover your own personal mysteries, ultimately your life will have yielded nothing by the time of your death. You'll die realizing that you wasted your entire life. If, on the other hand, you had a purpose in life beyond that little ball, all of that time spent in this world will have amounted to something. It'll have been worth the suffering and the hardship. It'll have been a life that was worth living. The goal of this game isn't to escape Harry's little ball, his inland empire. It was to reach out to the once presumed void that surrounds it, and bring some of its beauty back home, onto the little ball. It was to go out and learn why life is worth living, even if ultimately everything you'll ever be is eventually going to be reduced to nothing. You can never escape your own head. It's the only place you'll ever truly inhabit. You'll never be able to show its true beauty to the outside world. You'll never be able to take someone else onto your little ball. But that doesn't mean that this inland empire of yours is self-sufficient. Without bringing in help from the outside world, without being a part of this world that surrounds the little ball, without acknowledging that it is indeed the polar opposite of a void to drift through, your little ball will become a dirty, disgusting place, one filled with self-doubt and self-hatred. You'll look in the mirror and see sadness where there doesn't have to be any, where nobody else sees it. Your ideas will cascade into complicated webs of thought, ones which will ultimately crumble under their own weight. The world surrounding your little ball will inevitably be destroyed when you die, but without opening the windows and trying your best to let some of that world into yours, your little ball will be falling apart long before you die. If you let that happen, you won't just be a little ball floating in an empty void. There will be no ball. There will only be the void. The Furies will be laughing at you in the mirror. You can't try to isolate yourself to that ball, or else that grim future will be an inevitability. Have you ever just stood there staring at yourself in the mirror, trying on different combinations of posture and facial expression, when it occurred to you that you see nothing but sadness invisible to the rest of the world? The world inside your head is a comfortable place. It's where you were born. It's the place you're most familiar with. It's where you can discuss your darkest secrets. It's the only place where the complicated web of thoughts and memories that is yourself makes any sense. It's got all your favorite posters and mementos. It's a place that, even if you realized you were trapped, you wouldn't want to escape. However, the paint on the walls behind those posters is chipping. The wooden floorboards are rotting, water damage is carving away at the ceiling, and the only way to save this world of yours is to open up the windows of your mind and be a part of the world outside your own. The end of your world is inevitable, but you can make it last so much longer by simply giving it a break. It should only be the main room of your life. It shouldn't be the only room you ever exist in. If the world inside your head falls apart, then there's nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing. Behind every reed is a playful monster, but sometimes you have to simply be another reed.
And the trees are green.